Outlaw Country by Ghotty. Chapter 13, Highwayman. I rode for 34 days. The climate continued to make no goddamn sense whatsoever as desert bled into forest, forest into jungle, and jungles into some unholy combination of the two. I didn't recognize the climate I was in. It was, ethereal. Trees too tall, bushes too thick, creatures far too outlandish. It was like an exaggeration of a forest, designed by someone who didn't know there were more than one kind of tree. At least it was temperate. Not that temperature bothered me all that much anymore. It was peaceful. No matter how outlandish the climate became, nature was nature. It was away from the killing, and I had time to myself. It was time I used to acclimate, my new self and my new circumstances. I'm sure I'd find a conflict to stick my nose into soon enough, but it was only a matter of time. 3 minutes, to be exact. Do you hear that? I asked the horse, my ears far sharper than they should be. No, answered Jeff. His ears swiveled around for a bit, and he perked up. Never mind, I heard it. Sounds like a battle. How does that sound like a battle? I asked. It sounded more like a metalworking factory, a bunch of steel on steel and vague yelling. Jeff scoffed. Swords and sorcery kind of battle, dumbass. Oh, well, that makes more sense. Sorry I haven't been in too many of those sword fights, much less heard one. First time for everything, he said. And he began to gallop towards the noise without even asking me, not that I would have stopped him. He weaved between trees gracefully, going at a speed beyond any normal horse. I'm glad my enhanced stats affected the durability of my ass, as I was now effectively immune to being saddle sore. Is it still a sword fight if I bring a gun? I mused. Jeff thought about it for a moment. I think that depends on the sword-to-gun ratio. How many are you carrying again? 5. Well, let's call it 75% for it still to count as a sword fight. I think you're going about it all wrong. It's still a battle, yes, but I can't have a sword fight with a gun. Pfft, semantics. What are we talking about again? How guns are better than swords. Jeff nodded sagely, despite galloping and being a horse. Ah, yes, guns are indeed better than swords. I suspected I had been around Jeff for far too long. Anyway, nonsense conversations aside, we were rapidly growing closer to the sounds of conflict. The closer we got, the more of a story the sounds told. It sounded like many dozens of men against just a few, but the several dozens were getting their asses kicked. Screams of pain, anger, amusement rang out all into the crisp midday air. I broke through the tree line and observed the site of the conflict. It was quite a bit to take in. There was a carriage, decorated opulently, tipped over on its side on a very clearly man-made dirt road. A horde of dirty leather-clad men and women were in the process of attacking said carriage, but were being absolutely slaughtered by the carriage guards. Oh, this is such a cliché, remarked Jeff. I knew what a cliché was due to erudite, but I wasn't too sure what he was talking about. How so? Oh, buckaroo, trust me when I say that it's a minimum of 1 princess in that carriage. A princess? I reckon they have a lot of money. Depends on the specific cliché we're invoking, but chances are good, though. I'm honestly not sure if he was fooling around or not, but the decorations on the carriage definitely implied heavy wealth. It was gold-trimmed, for God's sake. I'd consider stepping in to help in hopes of payment, but it looked like they were doing just fine. The guards were split into 2 very distinct factions. One half of the group wore metal armor and generally used straight-edged swords of various sizes. Mixed in with that group were leather-wearing archers, and for whatever reason, folk wearing hooded cloth robes and wielding staves. The other faction was wearing long, flowing robes. Fancy haircuts. They generally wielded rather ornate weapons, curved swords, whips, fancy crescent spears. They had no uniform or even consistent choice of weaponry. Oddly enough, half of them looked way too old to be sword fighting. And there was one thing that stood out to me the most, though. It's impossible to avoid mentioning. All of these people were mightily attractive, aren't they? I observed. Well, I can't tell. I'm a horse. Yeah, fair enough. It was jarring. I wasn't even exaggerating. Pretty much all of the faces I could see looked like they were sculpted from marble. Male or female, old or young, it made me genuinely uncomfortable, as if they were a bunch of dolls masquerading as humans. Now, I watched one of the aforementioned staff-wielding guards shoot fire from nowhere and another shoot lightning. I suppose it was magic. Armor-wielding guards were charging through the bandits, cutting them to pieces with their rather large blades, and the bow-wielding archers were putting shots into vital areas. Meanwhile, the robe lovers were practically dancing around their opponents, carving them to pieces with smooth and flowing movements, the long sleeves of the robe obstructing the arms until it was too late for the outmatched bandits. Some of them flew across the battlefield as if on strings, and others didn't even bother with their weapons, somehow rupturing organs in a single strike. They were clearly very good at what they did. Unfortunately for me, they were all bronze core or below. Not quite sure how I could tell, but I'm long done questioning these sort of things. Jeff and I watched leisurely as they continued to fight. Now, there seemed to be an endless supply of bandits, willing to throw themselves into the blender of fire and steel. Why? The dumber the bastard, the more likely they are to run from a fight. Yet, these fools were pretty much throwing themselves into the blades. There was something afoot here, and I didn't have the information needed to figure out what. "Watch the carriage, you old fuck," yelled one of the armor-wearing guards. She was literally cutting through people with one massive swing. She looked important, with shiny silver plate armor and helmet, plus several insignias hanging from her breastplate. Her older voice was an odd mix of rough and smooth, a cadence I've only heard from city ladies turned desperado. "Do you think me a fool?" "To forget my lady would be unimaginable foolishness," echoed the robe-wearing old man. He, too, was tearing through the bandits like afterthought. His blade held in a reverse grip. He was carved in elegant gashes through the scores of bandits, which was especially impressive as he looked to be around 80 years old, and I can only hope to be that spry at his age. The wave of bandits was finally slowing down, and there had to be damn near 100 of them. It was extremely unlikely that they were deciding to commit suicide by senior of their own volition. More like they were being controlled by some external force. "Well, I reckon they won't hire me," I mused. "Well, I don't know, aren't you a silvery big shot now? I still don't get how you jumped so many ranks." It probably had to do with single-handedly subjugating a town. There was only 6, and I suspected 4 of them were still intact. And then again, what the hell do I know? Maybe I'm still at the bottom of the color code totem's pole. The guards finally finished off the rest of the bandits, blood and broken bones mixed with dirt in the road, as the guards began to clean their weapons, check the corpses, and generally wind down from a life-or-death battle they just took part in. That was until the shiny armored lady spotted me. She gestured towards her back line and roared, "One's trying to get away! Stop him!" Seriously? I cupped my hands to my mouth and yelled, "Do I look like I'm trying to escape, dumbass?" The old man looked me over. His eyes widened immediately. He turned to the lady in armor and yelled, voice tinged with worry, "Still your blades, fools." But it was too late. Arrows and fireballs were flying towards me. No blades, actually, which made me question this whole word choice. From my perspective, they were moving in slow motion. Presumably from the effect of the deadeye, I had time to leisurely consider how best to deal with it. Judging from the old man's reaction, it wouldn't be too hard to clear up the misunderstanding, so there was no need for anyone to die. I could deal with the projectiles easily enough. I had an intrinsic understanding of the sort of energy that went into this mystical bullshit. Call it a side effect of the core, but I knew I could cancel out the fireballs by squashing them with an equal force. Simply drew my walker, adjusted my energy output to exactly what I needed, and fired. I fanned the hammer and blew the arrows out of the air, and the blast of energy acting like any other projectile. The shots I sent for the fireballs essentially burst on impact, stifling the energy and forming the fireball and completely dispersing it. I hit all 9 projectiles in roughly a second. The armored lady looked quite surprised. I think she did, but she was wearing a full-face helmet. The old man ran towards me, all prior grace completely forgotten, and for a moment I thought he was trying to enter sword range, but the deranged look on his face bespoke of a desperation as opposed to that threat. He reached my side by the tree line and fell to his knees dramatically. As the other robed members of his posse looked away in embarrassment, meanwhile, the armored lady attempted to disappear into the ground. "Fellow Taoist, how do you reach Silver Core already?" pleaded the old man with a wild look in his eyes. "Well, I killed a whole lot of people, I guess," I stammered, almost as a complete loss for words. "I, too, have killed scores of man and beast, and yet I am only a Tier 3 Bronze Core, mere shadow of my old self. But there must be some unfathomable secret legacy you have stumbled upon. Have you happened to have fallen into any caves or containing a pocket dimension lately? Any voices in your head speaking to you of vast potential, have you?" "Quiet," I shushed him. He looked insulted. "I may be a mere bronze core, but for the heavens—" "Hush! I hear something." He finally shut up. It was true. I could hear something large coming through the forest, making a beeline towards our position. It took several more seconds for the old man and the lady knight to react, both heads swiveling towards the direction of the noise, and a second's delay for the rest of the guards. It didn't so much stomp its way through the forest as propel itself, its movements erratic and impossible for feet to produce. It sounded like a mass of pure weight going straight through the trees. I quickly found out that to be true. It burst through the tree line. I struggled to describe it, but it was very red, fleshy, and looked like a worm with a gaping maw for a mouth. Oh, and it had hundreds of tiny legs holding up its body. I guess that actually makes it closer to a caterpillar, but it was so obscene that it really didn't matter. "Carry her!" yelled the night lady, and all hell broke loose.